The text message hit my phone at 11:47 a.m., just as I balanced Sandra's favorite Thai lunch in one hand and fumbled for her office door with the other. The words glowed on my screen like a neon sign in a thunderstorm. "You're too available. It's unattractive." I stood there in the hallway of Brennan and Associates, holding pad Thai that was getting cold, staring at those words. 3 years of marriage, and my wife just told me that caring about her lunch preferences made me unattractive. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'm a mechanical engineer, trained to solve problems, and apparently I'd become one. Through the glass walls of her corner office, I could see Sandra laughing, not the polite professional chuckle she used with difficult clients. This was her real laugh, the one that used to be reserved for me. She was leaning against the balcony railing, and standing way too close was Arnold, her brother-in-law, my wife's sister's husband, and apparently the kind of man who wasn't too available. Arnold had that corporate climber look down to a science. Expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, perfect haircut, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to fix anything with your own hands. He was gesturing animatedly, and Sandra was hanging on every word like he was delivering the secrets of the universe instead of probably bragging about his latest real estate deal. I knocked on the glass door. Sandra looked up, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at being interrupted. She waved me in with the kind of smile she'd use on a persistent salesman. "Alex, you didn't need to bring lunch," she said, but she took the bag anyway. "Arnold was just telling me about this amazing property investment opportunity." Arnold extended his hand like we were meeting for the first time instead of having endured countless family dinners together. "Alex, good to see you, buddy. How's the engineering business?" "Buddy." "Right." "Same as always," I said, "keeping the world's machines running so people like you can make money off them." Sandra shot me a look that could have frozen water. "Arnold was just leaving. We'll catch up more at dinner Sunday." After Arnold left, with another one of those lingering goodbye hugs that lasted about 3 seconds too long, Sandra turned back to her computer without another word. I stood there holding the empty takeout bag, feeling like furniture that had been moved to the wrong room. "So," I said, "about that text. What about it?" She didn't look up from her screen. "Maybe we should talk about what's making you feel that way." Now she looked at me, and her expression was colder than I'd ever seen it. "Alex, you bring me lunch every day. You text me good morning and good night. You remember every little thing I mention wanting. It's—" She paused, searching for words. "It's suffocating." I thought it was being a good husband. Well, maybe that's the problem. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I left her office without saying goodbye. The elevator ride down to the parking garage gave me exactly 90 seconds to process what had just happened. My wife of 3 years had just told me that loving her was suffocating, that caring was unattractive, that being available, something I'd always thought was a virtue, was apparently my greatest flaw. By the time I got back to my own office at Morrison Engineering, I'd made a decision. If Sandra wanted unavailable, she was about to get a masterclass in it. My assistant, Chloe, looked up from her desk as I walked past. At 24, she had the kind of sharp intelligence that made her invaluable, and the kind of ambition that meant she wouldn't be my assistant for long. Today, she was wearing a navy blazer that made her look older than her years and more professional than half the senior engineers in the building. "Rough lunch?" she asked, noting my expression. "You could say that." I paused at my office door. "Chloe, that Miami project we've been putting off, the one with the 3-week site survey? The one you said we should wait on until next quarter?" I changed my mind. "Book my flight for tomorrow." She raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow? That's pretty sudden." Sometimes sudden is exactly what a situation needs. That evening, Sandra came home to find me packing. She stood in the bedroom doorway, watching me fold shirts with the kind of precision I brought to everything else in my life. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "Miami. Work project. 3 weeks, maybe a month." "A month? Since when?" I looked up from my suitcase. "Since I decided to become less available." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even concern. "Alex, about what I said earlier. No need to explain. You were clear. Too available, too suffocating, too unattractive. Message received." "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said, Sandra. And you know what? You were right. I have been too available, but that's about to change." She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking uncertain. "We should talk about this." "Talk about what?" "You've made your position clear. I'm simply adapting to meet your expectations." "Don't be dramatic." I zipped up my suitcase and turned to face her. Dramatic would be making a scene. This is just practical problem solving. You identified an issue, I'm implementing a solution. The next morning, I was on a plane to Miami with Chloe, who'd volunteered to handle the project coordination. As we lifted off, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the thrill of uncertainty. For 3 years, I'd been predictable, reliable, available. Now, I was 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, heading toward a future that Sandra couldn't control or predict. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "Have a safe flight. We'll talk when you get back." I turned off my phone without responding. If Sandra wanted unavailable, she was about to discover just how unavailable I could be. 3 days into the Miami project, I made a discovery that changed everything. It wasn't in the engineering reports or the site surveys. It was in my own home, through the magic of modern technology and my wife's careless assumption that I was too trusting to be suspicious. I'd been having trouble accessing our home network remotely to grab some files from my personal server. The connection kept dropping, which meant Sandra was probably streaming something and hogging bandwidth. So I did what any reasonable network administrator would do. I logged into our router to check the traffic. What I found was Sandra's laptop, connected to a video call that had been running for over an hour. The network log showed massive data usage, the kind you get from high-definition video streaming, at 2 in the afternoon on a Wednesday when she should have been at work. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the router's admin panel and found something interesting. Sandra had been using our home network for video calls during work hours for the past 3 weeks. Long calls, private calls, the kind that eat up bandwidth and apparently couldn't be conducted from her office. I called our house phone from my hotel room in Miami. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I tried Sandra's cell, straight to voicemail. Either she was in a very important meeting, or she was very busy being unavailable herself. That's when I remembered the security camera I'd installed in our living room last year after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. Sandra had insisted on it, said it would make her feel safer when I traveled for work. The camera fed to a cloud service that I could access from anywhere. I pulled up the app on my laptop, my hands actually shaking as I navigated to the live feed. What I saw made my stomach drop through the floor of my Miami hotel room. Sandra was on our couch, laptop open, laughing at something on her screen. She was wearing a silk robe, the expensive one I'd bought her for our anniversary, and nothing else, as far as I could tell. Her hair was down, makeup perfect, and she was positioned in front of the camera like she was posing for a photo shoot. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear her voice through the laptop's microphone, faint but clear. "I wish you were here right now instead of just on this screen." The voice that responded was unmistakably Arnold's. "Soon, beautiful, very soon." I sat in that Miami hotel room, staring at my laptop screen, watching my wife flirt with her brother-in-law in our living room while wearing the anniversary gift I'd saved 3 months to buy her. The irony was so sharp it could have cut glass. She'd complained about me being too available while she was apparently very available to someone else. I started recording. Not for legal reasons, Florida's a 2-party consent state anyway, but because I needed proof that this was really happening, that 3 years of marriage hadn't just evaporated because I brought her lunch every day. Over the next hour, I watched Sandra perform what could only be described as a private show. She moved around our living room like she owned a stage, talking to Arnold in a voice I'd never heard her use with me, sultry, confident, free. When the call finally ended, I watched her sit back on our couch and smile at herself in the laptop's camera reflection. She looked satisfied, happy, more alive than I'd seen her in months. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling of my hotel room. Outside, Miami was alive with evening traffic and the promise of nightlife. Inside, I felt like I was watching my marriage collapse in real time, 1 pixel at a time. My phone buzzed, a text from Sandra. "Miss you. House feels empty without you." I stared at that message for a long time. Miss me? The house felt empty? She'd just spent the afternoon in our living room, wearing my anniversary gift, entertaining another man in ways she'd never entertained me. And now she was texting about missing me. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Angry ones, hurt ones, sarcastic ones that would have made her defensive. Finally, I settled on something simple. Miami's keeping me busy. Talk soon. But I wasn't planning to talk soon. I was planning to watch, to learn, to understand exactly what kind of game my wife was playing while I was being too available. The next morning, I logged into our phone account, something I'd never done before, because I trusted Sandra to handle our bills. What I found was 3 months of text messages and call logs that painted a picture I'd been too naive to see. Hundreds of messages between Sandra and Arnold. Photos, long phone calls that happened when I was at work or traveling, plans to meet, discussions about me that ranged from dismissive to cruel. One message thread made me actually laugh, despite everything. Sandra complaining to Arnold about how I always remembered her favorite coffee order, how I noticed when she got her hair cut, how I asked about her day and actually listened to the answer. All the things I'd thought made me a good husband, she'd been mocking as weaknesses. Arnold's responses were even better. He called me pathetically devoted and completely clueless. He joked about how easy it was to flirt with Sandra right in front of me because I was too trusting to notice. The final message in the thread was from 2 days ago, after I'd left for Miami. Finally got the puppy dog out of the house. Want to come over and play? Arnold's response: on my way, beautiful. I sat in my Miami hotel room, surrounded by engineering reports and project timelines, and realized that my wife had been conducting an affair in our home while I was in another state, working to pay for the life she was busy destroying. But instead of anger, I felt something else: clarity. For the first time in months, I could see the situation with perfect engineering precision. Sandra had identified me as too available, too predictable, too safe. She wanted excitement, danger, the thrill of the unavailable. Well, she was about to get exactly what she'd asked for. I extended my Miami stay by 2 weeks, not because the project required it, we'd finished the initial survey ahead of schedule, but because I needed time to think, time to plan, time to become the kind of man my wife apparently found attractive. Chloe proved invaluable during this period. She had a talent for research that bordered on supernatural, and when I mentioned that I was having personal issues that required some background investigation, she offered to help without asking uncomfortable questions. I minored in digital forensics, she said over dinner at a beachfront restaurant in South Beach. People leave more trails than they realize. What kind of trails? Social media posts, location data, financial records if you know where to look. Most people think they're being discreet, but discretion requires a level of technical sophistication that most people don't have. She was wearing a white sundress that made her look older than 24, and I found myself noticing things about her that I'd never paid attention to in the office. The way she listened when I talked. The way she asked questions that showed she was actually thinking about my answers. The way she never once made me feel like my attention was suffocating. Hypothetically, I said, if someone wanted to document a pattern of deceptive behavior, what would be the most effective approach? Hypothetically, I'd start with social media cross-referencing. People lie to their spouses, but they tell the truth to their phones. Location services, photo metadata, even the timing of posts can tell you where someone really was and who they were with. And this would all be legal? If it's information they're voluntarily sharing on public or semi-public platforms? Absolutely. People have this weird idea that privacy means hiding things from their spouse while broadcasting them to hundreds of strangers online. That night, Chloe showed me what she'd found. Arnold's Instagram was a goldmine of careless oversharing. Photos from restaurants where he claimed to be having business dinners, except Sandra's reflection was visible in the wine glasses. Check-ins at hotels during times when his wife thought he was traveling for work, but Sandra had called in sick those same days. A pattern of behavior that painted a picture of two people who thought they were being clever, but were actually documenting their own deception. There's more, Chloe said, pulling up Sandra's social media accounts. Your wife has been posting a lot of photos lately that suggest she's living a very different life than the one she's sharing with you. Sandra's Instagram showed a woman I barely recognized, designer clothes I'd never seen her wear, expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, photos with friends who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, all of them young and glamorous, and nothing like the couple friends we'd socialized with during our marriage. When were these taken? I asked. Based on the metadata, most of them are from the past 3 months, all during times when you were either at work or traveling. I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile this glamorous stranger with the woman who complained about my predictability. Sandra looked confident in these pictures. Radiant, like she was living her real life instead of the compromise she'd settled for with me. There's something else, Chloe said quietly. I found Arnold's wife's social media too. She's been posting a lot about working late, staying home alone, missing her husband. The timeline matches up perfectly with when your wife was posting these party photos. So Arnold wasn't just cheating on me. He was cheating on his own wife, leaving her home alone while he played the exciting, unavailable man for Sandra. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I'm sorry, Chloe said. I know this isn't easy to see. Actually, it's exactly what I needed to see. I closed the laptop and looked at her. Chloe, how would you feel about extending this Miami trip another week? I'd love to, but won't your wife start asking questions? Let her ask. I'm learning the value of being unavailable. That night, I posted my first Instagram photo in over a year. It was a picture of Chloe and me at dinner, both of us laughing at something she'd said. The Miami skyline glittered behind us, and we looked like exactly what we were, two young professionals enjoying an expensive dinner in an expensive city. I tagged the location, added a caption about unexpected partnerships and new perspectives, and posted it without giving Sandra any advance warning. My phone started buzzing within minutes. Sandra's first text, "Who is that?" Second text, "Alex, who is the woman in your photo?" Third text, "Are you going to answer me?" I waited 2 hours before responding. "Colleague, work dinner. Thought you'd appreciate me networking more." "She looks young. She's brilliant. Age is irrelevant. When are you coming home?" "When the project's finished." I thought it was finished. Plans change. I'm learning to be more spontaneous. I could practically feel Sandra's frustration through the phone. For 3 years, I'd been predictable. Home every night by 6:30. Weekend plans made a week in advance. Vacation destinations chosen based on her preferences. Now I was in Miami, posting photos with a beautiful colleague and giving her the kind of vague, unsatisfying answers she'd been giving me for months. The next morning, I got a call from Sandra's sister, Lisa, Arnold's wife. "Alex, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm worried about Arnold. He's been working late every night for weeks, and when I try to reach him, he doesn't answer. I thought maybe you'd know if Sandra's firm is working on some big project with his company." I felt genuinely sorry for Lisa. She was a nice woman who'd married a man she thought was trustworthy, and now she was calling me for reassurance about her husband's fidelity while he was busy destroying both our marriages. "Lisa, I think you should ask Arnold directly about his work schedule. Marriage works best when people are honest with each other." "You're right, of course. You and Sandra are so lucky to have that kind of trust." After I hung up, I realized that Sandra's deception wasn't just hurting me. It was part of a larger web of lies that was hurting everyone involved. Arnold was lying to his wife. Sandra was lying to me. They were both lying to themselves about what they were doing and what it meant. But I was done being the only honest person in a relationship built on deception. That afternoon, Chloe and I were working by the hotel pool when my phone rang. Sandra's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in our marriage, I considered not answering. "You should take it," Chloe said. "But remember, you're not the same person who left for Miami 2 weeks ago." She was right. The man who'd boarded that plane had been predictable, available, eager to please. The man sitting by this pool had seen his wife's secret life, understood the game she was playing, and decided to play it better than she ever could. I answered the phone. "Sandra." "Alex, we need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not on the phone. When are you coming home?" "I told you, when the project's finished." "How much longer?" "Hard to say. We've discovered some complications that require extended analysis." There was a long pause. "What kind of complications?" I looked at Chloe, who was pretending to read while obviously listening to every word. "The kind that change everything once you see them clearly." "Alex, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, and hung up. For the first time in months, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I came home on a Thursday evening in late October, after 5 weeks in Miami that had transformed me in ways Sandra couldn't have anticipated. The man who'd left had been predictable, available, desperate for her approval. The man who returned was something else entirely. Sandra was waiting in our living room, the same room where I'd watched her perform for Arnold through our security camera. She'd dressed carefully for my homecoming, the blue dress I'd once told her was my favorite, her hair styled the way she wore it on our first date, makeup applied with the precision of someone who understood the importance of first impressions. "Welcome home," she said, standing to greet me with a hug that felt rehearsed. I accepted the hug but didn't return it with the enthusiasm she was clearly expecting. "Good to be back." "How was Miami?" "Productive. Very productive." She waited for me to elaborate, to share details the way I always had after business trips. Instead, I set my suitcase down and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water, leaving her standing in the living room. "Alex?" She followed me. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Why?" "You seem different." 5 weeks in Miami will do that to a person. I drank my water slowly, watching her over the rim of the glass. "How have you been?" "Busy with work. Missing you." "Missing me?" I set down the glass and looked at her directly. "That's interesting?" "Why is it interesting?" "No reason. Just interesting." The conversation continued like this for another 10 minutes. Sandra asking questions, me giving answers that revealed nothing while implying everything. She was clearly frustrated by my new communication style, but I was enjoying it immensely. Finally, she tried a different approach. "I saw your Instagram photos from Miami. that woman you were with. Chloe? My assistant, very talented. She's pretty. I hadn't noticed. Really? I've been focused on work. Sandra's expression shifted slightly. For 3 years, she'd been able to read me like an engineering manual, predictable, straightforward, easy to understand. Now she was looking at me like I was written in a foreign language. Alex, I feel like we need to talk. Really talk. About what? About us. About our marriage. About that text I sent you before you left. I leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed my arms. What about it? I think I was wrong about you being too available. Were you? Yes. These past 5 weeks, with you gone, I realized how much I appreciate having you around. How much you appreciate having me available, you mean? She flinched slightly. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? I meant that I missed you. I missed talking to you, spending time with you, having you here. I nodded thoughtfully. That's nice to hear. So things can go back to normal now? Normal? I pushed off from the counter and walked past her toward the stairs. I'm not sure normal is what either of us needs right now. That night, Sandra tried to initiate intimacy for the first time in months. I wasn't interested, not because I didn't find her attractive. She was still the woman I'd married, still beautiful in all the ways that had first drawn me to her, but because I knew exactly where she'd been and what she'd been doing while I was gone, and the thought of touching her made my skin crawl. I'm tired, I said when she moved closer to me in bed. Long flight. Of course. Tomorrow, then. Maybe. She lay awake for a long time that night. I could feel her staring at me in the darkness, trying to figure out what had changed. I pretended to sleep, but I was actually planning. The next morning, I got up early and went to my home office, a small room Sandra rarely entered because she found my engineering books and technical manuals boring. I opened my laptop and reviewed everything Chloe and I had compiled during our extended Miami stay. Photos of Sandra and Arnold together, cross-referenced with times when they'd both claimed to be elsewhere. Financial records showing expensive dinners and hotel stays that neither of them had mentioned to their spouses. Social media posts that contradicted their stated whereabouts. A comprehensive timeline of deception that painted a picture of two people who thought they were smarter than everyone around them. But the most damaging evidence wasn't digital, it was psychological. I'd spent 5 weeks learning to be unavailable, and Sandra's reaction to my absence had been exactly what Chloe had predicted. She'd panicked. The secure, dismissive woman who told me I was too available had suddenly become desperate for my attention the moment she couldn't have it. You're up early, Sandra said from the doorway. She was wearing one of my old t-shirts, trying to look casual and approachable. Catching up on work. I closed the laptop without letting her see the screen. Want some coffee? I'll get it myself. Alex, please. Let me do something nice for you. I looked at her standing in the doorway of my office, wearing my shirt, offering to bring me coffee with the kind of eager attention she'd been withholding for months. The irony was almost funny. Okay, I said. Coffee would be nice. While she was in the kitchen, I opened my phone and sent a text to Chloe. Back home, phase 2 begins now. Her response came immediately. Good luck. Remember what we discussed. What we'd discussed was simple. Sandra had spent months training me to believe that my availability was a weakness. Now I was going to teach her that my unavailability was a strength she couldn't compete with. When Sandra returned with coffee, I was already putting on my jacket. Where are you going? Gym. I started a new workout routine in Miami. What kind of routine? Boxing. She looked surprised. Since when do you box? Since I decided to try new things. I'll be back later. How much later? Hard to say. Depends on how the training goes. I left her standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee she'd made for a husband who was no longer interested in her gestures of domestic affection. The boxing gym was exactly what I needed, a place where problems were solved with direct action rather than passive acceptance. I'd never been much of a fighter, but 5 weeks of planning had taught me that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. My trainer, an ex-Marine named Pete, took one look at me and nodded approvingly. You look different than you did 5 weeks ago. Feel different, too. Good. Different is what we're going for. You ready to learn how to hit back? I wrapped my hands and stepped up to the heavy bag. I've been ready for a long time. As I threw my first punch, I thought about Sandra at home, probably wondering where I was and when I'd be back. For 3 years, she'd known my schedule better than I did. Now she was learning what uncertainty felt like, and this was just the beginning. 2 weeks after my return from Miami, I discovered that Sandra's affair was more complicated than I'd realized. The revelation came not from my own investigation, but from an unexpected source. Arnold's wife, Lisa. She called me on a Saturday morning while Sandra was at her weekly hair appointment, an appointment that, according to the timeline Chloe and I had developed, usually lasted 3 hours but involved only 90 minutes of actual hairstyling. "Alex, I need to talk to someone, and you're the only person I trust," Lisa said. Her voice was shaking. "It's about Arnold." "What about Arnold?" "I think he's having an affair." I sat in my home office staring at the evidence I'd compiled over the past month and tried to sound surprised. "What makes you think that?" "I found text messages, hundreds of them, and photos." She started crying. "Alex, I'm so sorry to dump this on you, but I don't know what to do." "Lisa, take a deep breath. What kind of photos?" The kind that make it clear he's been intimate with someone else, someone he calls beautiful and perfect, and all the things he used to call me." I felt genuinely sorry for Lisa. She was discovering what I'd known for weeks, but her pain was fresh and raw in a way that mine had crystallized into something harder. "Do you know who it is?" I asked. "That's why I'm calling you. Alex, I think it might be Sandra." The silence stretched between us. Lisa was waiting for me to express shock, to deny the possibility, to reassure her that her suspicions were wrong. Instead, I found myself asking, "What makes you think it's Sandra?" The timeline matches up perfectly. Every time Arnold claims to be working late, Sandra posts photos of herself out somewhere expensive. Every time he travels for business, she calls in sick. And yesterday, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for jewelry I've never seen. "What kind of jewelry?" "A necklace. Expensive. The receipt shows it was purchased 3 days ago, but he hasn't given me anything." I knew exactly what necklace she was talking about. Sandra had been wearing it yesterday, claiming it was a gift from her mother for no particular reason. I'd thought it was strange at the time. Sandra's mother was generous but practical, not given to spontaneous, expensive gifts. "Lisa, what do you want to do with this information?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to confront them, but part of me is terrified of what I'll find out." "What if I told you that confrontation might not be the most effective approach?" "What do you mean?" I made a decision that would change everything. "Lisa, can you meet me somewhere private? There are some things I need to show you." We met at a coffee shop across town, far from anywhere Sandra or Arnold might accidentally encounter us. Lisa looked like she hadn't slept in days, which, based on what she'd told me about Arnold's recent behavior, was probably accurate. I brought my laptop and a folder of printed evidence. Not everything. I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of what I knew, but enough to confirm her suspicions and propose an alternative to confrontation. "Before I show you this," I said, "I need you to understand that what we're dealing with isn't just an affair. It's a pattern of deception that involves both our spouses, and it's been going on for months." Lisa's face went pale. "You knew?" "I suspected. Then I investigated. Then I confirmed." I showed her the social media cross-references, the timeline of deceptions, the financial evidence of expensive dates and hotel stays. I watched her face change as she realized that her husband and my wife had been conducting their affair with a level of planning and coordination that made their betrayal feel almost professional. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Definitively. About 3 weeks. Suspected? Much longer." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the information, and because I thought you deserved to discover it in a way that gave you some control over what happens next." Lisa stared at the evidence spread across our coffee shop table. "What kind of control?" "The kind that comes from being smarter than they think you are." I explained my theory. Sandra and Arnold believed they were conducting a sophisticated affair, but they were actually documenting their own deception with a carelessness that bordered on arrogance. They thought their spouses were too trusting, too naive, too available to notice what was happening right in front of us. "So what do we do?" Lisa asked. "We let them continue to underestimate us while we prepare for the confrontation on our terms, not theirs." "What does that mean?" "It means we gather more evidence. It means we protect our financial interests. It means we decide when and how this comes to light, instead of stumbling into it accidentally." Lisa was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd told her. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I recognized. It was the same look I'd seen in my own mirror after discovering Sandra's deception. The look of someone who'd been underestimated for too long and was ready to prove how wrong that assumption was. "Alex, there's something else you should know." "What?" "I don't think Arnold is the mastermind here. I think someone else is pulling the strings." "What makes you say that?" "Because Arnold isn't smart enough to plan something this elaborate. He's impulsive, careless, not good at keeping secrets. But this affair has been conducted with a level of sophistication that doesn't match his personality." I thought about what she was saying. Arnold had always struck me as exactly the kind of person Lisa was describing. Confident, but not clever. Ambitious, but not strategic. The affair I'd uncovered did seem more organized than his usual approach to life. Do you have any idea who might be helping them? I have a theory, but you're not going to like it. Try me. I think it's Sandra's friend Serena. The name hit me like a physical blow. Serena had been Sandra's best friend since college, her maid of honor at our wedding, the person Sandra turned to for advice about everything from career decisions to vacation plans. If Serena was involved in orchestrating this affair, it meant Sandra's betrayal was even more calculated than I'd realized. Why do you think it's Serena? Because she's the only person who knows both Sandra and Arnold well enough to facilitate this, and because she's been asking a lot of questions about you lately. What kind of questions? Your work schedule, your travel plans, your relationship with Sandra. She's been pumping me for information every time we see each other, claiming she's worried about Sandra, but asking very specific questions about when you're home and when you're not. I sat back in my chair, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. If Lisa was right, then Serena had been using her friendship with both our families to orchestrate a betrayal that went far deeper than a simple affair. Lisa, how long has Serena been asking these questions? Months, since before you went to Miami. Which meant Serena had been planning this long before Sandra sent me that text about being too available. The affair wasn't a spontaneous attraction between Sandra and Arnold. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to destroy my marriage while making it look like a natural consequence of my own inadequacies. We need more evidence, I said. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves Serena's involvement. Because if she's been orchestrating this, then Sandra and Arnold aren't the only ones who are going to face consequences. Lisa smiled for the first time since we'd started talking. Alex, I think you and I are going to make a very good team. As we left the coffee shop, I realized that my marriage wasn't just ending. It was revealing itself to have been a lie from the very beginning. But instead of feeling devastated, I felt something else. The cold satisfaction of an engineer who'd finally identified the root cause of a system failure.